Hello, I'm Melanie Bunn. I am a nurse and I am a consultant with a nonprofit organization called Dementia Alliance of North Carolina. And I've been asked, and I'm very honored and grateful to be part of this conference and this presentation, talking specifically about a condition that isn't talked about very often in dementia, whether it's Alzheimer's type dementia or whether it's Huntington's dementia, Huntington's disease. We don't talk about it. And we don't talk about it often because we don't understand it. So thank you for spending some time with me talking about something, and we'll share together. So I'm going to bring up a PowerPoint because some of us really have to see things to really understand them. And this is particularly a word that I think is helpful to say. So it's anosognosia, anosognosia. And it is a condition that, as I said, is common in Huntington's disease. So let's talk about what it really is. I get concerned about this being an issue, about this being something that's going on when families start to say to me, if she would just admit that she's got a problem, if he would just let us help. He says, no, he doesn't need any help. She says, I don't have a problem. And I can't make her understand. How do I make him understand? This is the condition that comes to my mind is we may be talking about this anosognosia. So you don't have to be able to say it to be able to recognize it. You don't have to be able to say it for it to start to look kind of familiar. But what is important is realizing that it is a health condition. It's a change associated with Huntington's disease. Because what we often call it is stubborn, or what we often call it is hard headed, or what we often call it is manipulative, or what we often call it is the person is in denial. But the reality is, it's not that at all. It truly is the brain of the person with Huntington's disease doesn't get it. That person doesn't get that these things are changing, that these things are going on. So, in Huntington's disease specifically, it occurs in about 25 to 50% of people with Huntington's. Now, I mean, the range, right? I mean, 25, so a quarter to half. I mean, that's a huge range. Well, it probably doesn't surprise many of you because with Huntington's disease, these ranges happen because there are issues with how we identify problems. There's issues with communication. There's issues with getting information from care partners. It's complicated. What it seems like is between a quarter to a half of people with Huntington's disease at any one time are going to be experiencing this cognitive change, this disability, this loss of ability. So, this is a study that was published in a very reputable journal, the Journal of Geriatric Psychiatry and Neurology. A gentleman named Wilba and Associates in 2019 published this article, and they were talking about a study that they did in an Huntington's disease clinic. And they took 38 people and their care partners, and they did all the usual stuff. They looked at demographic information. They looked at the Unified Huntington's Disease Rating Scale, the MMSE, which is the Mini Mental State Examination, the STROOP, the trail making, verbal fluency, symbol digit modalities test. Some of you may be familiar with some of these. Some of you may not, or some of them and not all of them, but they're standard tests that are administered. They also collected some information from the care partners. So they did the Zaret burden interview. So they looked at the information from that. They did something called the caregiver burden inventory. Again, very standard, very common evaluations, ways of collecting information. So they did that. And they also did another scale. They did an anosognosia scale. And they used that to kind of split people into two groups. So they split them into people with and people without. And what they found was 10 of the 38 people. So you'll notice that falls right into that 25 to 50%. 10 of people with were identified as having anosognosia. And so they compared the responses on all of those other studies for the 10 with and the 28 without. And they found some interesting things. They found that the people who, the dyads, the partners who had it, the people with Huntington's disease had poor executive function, which is up here. And it's your ability to plan. It's your ability to um, initiate sequence. It's your ability to use impulse control. It's your ability to kind of think through things and say, this is the better choice. This is really not a good choice. So it's that kind of ability. So they found that people living with Huntington's disease didn't do as well in those pieces when they had anosognosia. They also found that for the care partners, they were struggling as well. That those care partners who had the higher with the person with anosognosia, they had higher burden ratings. So they were struggling. The person with Huntington's disease was struggling, and it's all because this part of their brain doesn't work. So what are we really talking about? We're really talking about this lack of insight. So for people with Huntington's disease, they're having changes. Their brains are changes, their bodies are changing, their behaviors are changing, but they don't get it. They don't get that they're not doing the same as they used to do. They don't get that they can't do the things the way they used to, or their brains aren't working right, or they're acting differently. But here's where it gets to be really complicated. It can fluctuate from moment to moment. So you may have a conversation with the person with Huntington's disease, and the conversation may go, it seems like your movement is getting worse. And the person says, yes, you're right. It's really getting much worse. And you say, we need to talk to the physician about this the next time we go, or the nurse practitioner or the PA. And the person says, absolutely. We've really got to let them know that things are not going well. And you go into that appointment, and that conversation, maybe that conversation didn't happen weeks ago or days ago. Maybe that conversation happened in the car, sitting outside of the office. So we have this conversation sitting in the car outside of the office, and we agree things are different. I'm having more trouble with my memory. I'm having more trouble with my impulse control. I'm having more trouble with my movement. I'm having more trouble. And you walk in and you sit down, and about 23 minutes later, I think I'm doing fine. And you look at the person you love, and you don't know what to say because your frontal lobe goes, we agreed that things are hard. We had the conversation. Things are hard. They aren't going well. What do you mean? You think you're fine? You aren't fine. We talked about this. Take a deep breath with me, with me, with me. Take a deep breath and let it go. Because in that moment, it feels like that person is setting you up. In that moment, it feels like that person is being dishonest, is telling a lie. In that moment, it feels like that person is changing the rules. We agreed, and now it's different. And the challenge is, it's not that the person doesn't remember the conversation, or that the person isn't experiencing the changes. It's that in this moment, this part of their brain right here isn't connecting that. So in this moment, this part of the brain isn't letting that person have that insight. So it's kind of like this part of the brain, if you put your hand up like this and you go, I am in a challenging situation, I've got this, or I am in a challenging situation, I need help. Your brain has the ability to do that because it's intact, it's connected, it's engaged physically and chemically. For the person with Huntington's disease, it's not working. Those connections aren't working. So in that moment, they don't realize what's really going on in their brains. So this is a brain picture. When you look at it, these are Alzheimer's brains. I really tried to find for y'all brains of people with Huntington's disease. They're different diseases. I know they're different diseases, but it does show you this part of the brain in a person who's healthy and intact, and this part of the brain in a person who's not healthy and intact. So the reason, even though it's Alzheimer's, not Huntington's, it does show the relationship between the gray matter around the outside, which is the storage, and the white matter on the inside, which is that connective tissue, which changes in Huntington's disease as well as in Alzheimer's and the other dementias. So even though it's not going to be exactly the same, it gives you that sense of that structure around the outside, those connective tissues. So in this part of the brain, you see there is a ton of connective tissue, and that's because this part of the brain, this frontal lobe, takes all kinds of pieces of information together, puts them together, and comes up with what should I do? How should I respond? How do I behave in this situation versus in this other situation? How do I respond to this person versus this person? This part of the brain is losing its ability to drive the person's life. Again, and I'm so sorry, these are Alzheimer's pictures, not Huntington's pictures, but you can see in the person who's healthy, this frontal lobe right here, right up at the top here, that frontal lobe, which is red and firing and driving. And then what happens when this brain doesn't have this kind of connection to drive and to fire, then what starts running is this amygdala response and this amygdala response. So I'm going to stop sharing for a moment and we're really going to talk about what that means. So when this part of the brain isn't working, when I don't have insight, then what tends to be working really hard is that amygdala, that fight, fright, flight, protect myself. This is dangerous, or I want it, I want it, I want it. So whether the change is related to Alzheimer's disease or Huntington's disease or something else, is what we've got. So for people with Huntington's, what's happening is this part of the brain up here isn't driving as much. So people lose that insight and they lose that understanding. So when I have a change, whether the change is in my mobility or whether the change is in my thinking or whether the change is in my emotions or whether the change is in my behaviors, for people living with Huntington's disease, that 25 to 50% of them who are experiencing this specific challenge, they don't get that it's coming from them. They don't understand that this is my fault, not fault. Fault's not right, but this is a change within me. So then they start establishing the change within the other things that are going on around them. So what can you do? You can't change the brain. You can't fill in those brain cells. You can't replace them. You can't build the connective tissue. You can't rebuild those chemicals. Backing off and thinking, who can change? And it's going to be us. We're going to be the ones who have to change. And we do that by, and these things sound So easy for me sitting here in my kitchen talking about them. And I know they are so different when it's you and a person you care a lot about, or you and a person you've worked with for a while. I understand that it's really hard to let go of that, but letting go of that need to be right, that need to explain. You agreed. I tape recorded you in the car saying, yes, your movement is worse. Now I'm playing the tape for the provider, and you say, I never said that. I would never say that. Yes, you did. It's your voice. I can take it to the FBI. I can have it. Let go. Let go of those unrealistic expectations that if we practice, or if we try, or if I videotape, here's the videotape. Now watch how your movement changes from here to here. Those expectations that we can use, it's like taking, because my frontal lobe works, I if I bang it hard enough into yours, maybe yours will start working. Brains don't work that way. I can't work my brain hard enough to force your brain to work. So changing your focus from what's not working to what is working. So changing your focus from what's hard for the person, what's difficult, what's challenging, to what the person is able to do. So maybe the person doesn't have that kind of insight and awareness, but maybe what they can do is write your name, and then we can watch and see how things are changing. What we can do is find ways to support yourself, to remind yourself that this is not this person being deceitful, or this person lying to me, or this person in denial, or this person trying to manipulate or make me feel bad. It's not that at all. It's this person's brain. The connections aren't letting them be the person that they used to be. What you can do is reach out and validate and verify with the others. And that may be other people in your family, it may be other people on the healthcare team, it may be people within your community. What have you noticed? So you can kind of validate that I'm not being too hard on him, I'm not being too picky. There really is some change going on that's important, that we need to find something to work on together to work through this. And last, finding, what can you do? Well, I talked about going around the mountain instead of going through it. And so instead of trying to convince the person you got a problem, you need help, I try to find ways to go around the mountain, or over the mountain, or under the mountain, or around and round and round to the top, and then around and around and around to the bottom. So we can find some ways to really make those connections. And maybe that might include some things like asking the person for their help by, if the relationship has become damaged, because the part of memory and awareness that sticks is emotion. So if I've really been drilling, it's not right, you need help, to rebuild that connection with, could you help me? Here's something to show you that I love you, and then let's do this together. And then realizing that universally everyone has challenges. Universally, everybody has good days and bad days. And my perspective is, maybe today's not the best day ever for you. So let's see if we can figure out a way to get through this day, knowing that this is not your best motor day, or this is not your best emotional day. And lastly, reach out for support. Now, the fact that you are part of this conference means that you are connected with this organization. So, that connection is precious. That connection is important. So, keep that connection with this organization. Reach out to other organizations that may have resources that can be helpful, that may have strategies that can be helpful. Make those connections. Reach out for support, but reach out to support within the community of people who get it. Because there are a lot of people out there who care a lot and want to help, but they don't get it. Now, for people with Huntington disease, we know why they don't get it. They don't get it because they've got a brain condition. For some of those other folks out there, they don't get it because maybe it's a lack of information, education. Maybe it's a lack of relationship building. Maybe it's a lack of interest and commitment. It's something that's different, but build your community with people who get it so you can build yourself up and build those skills and build those connections and those relationships. So I want to thank you for being part of the conference. Thank you for coming to spend some time with me. I wish we could all be together, and maybe we will sometime. But thank you for reaching out for information, for education, for referrals, and mostly for support. Enjoy the rest of the conference.